All right. Oklahoma born, oil and gas dipped, Russian speaking, nuclear engineer, managing director at the Radiant Energy Fund, global savior of nuclear power plants, energy banter, and a bearer of a not so secret stash. Finally, I've got the man, the myth, the mustache, Mark Nelson. Sir, thank you for investing your time with me.
Thank you for that flattering introduction. I'm not going to argue with the mustache secrecy, but I want to say that it's very hard for any one person or one organization to save a nuclear plant. But I've been very lucky to work with an incredible crowd of people, growing crowd of people around the world to channel our energies to save nuclear plants.
And I had to be a suck up off the get-go. And well, you probably already know this, but I just want to show my respect and just thank you in the name of the uranium investment community as well, to you and all the people that are doing the work, for all the work that you do, because you do a lot. Okay. And it's well appreciated. I just want you to know that.
Well, thank you very much, Antonio. Look, if you guys make a lot of money, I suppose that's just got to be a consolation prize to trying to save the world.
Let's hope we get that first part and do make a lot of money, because it's been painful in the last couple of months, really. But yeah, pleasure is mine. And I was just thinking, let me maybe start you off with a somewhat of a loaded question here before we actually get talking about nuclear energy. It's a simple question, but it's a loaded one. Why? Like, why do you do what you do, and why do you do so much?
Because it's there. Look, we've got one life to live. We're on this silly rock slinging itself around a star of not any particular note or reputation. And we kind of have to choose our adventure at some point. And for me, as a young man who wanted to do grand projects, what could be more grand than taking the least appreciated but most powerful energy technology towards its destiny, which in my opinion is to be the primary source of energy for global society. So look, it's an adventure. I wanted something that I could fight really hard on, but could feel just and moral at the end of the day. I know that sounds kind of obnoxious. I'm not here to moralize with people. Hey, look, if I can convince bad people to like nuclear energy for selfish, self-interested reasons, that's going to be just as powerful and more effective for humanity than convincing good people to like, other types of energy for only the best and most charitable reasons. Look, in the outcome matters. I think that's something I've said when talking to uranium investors. It's like, look, if we were in a different energy community where, let's say it's solar panels, where in order for commodity prices to go up a lot, there's a very large change on the price of solar. Well, so in nuclear energy, because the uranium is such a small part of the cost of producing nuclear energy, I can be happy that you guys are on my team, and you can be happy that I'm on your team, and our interests are aligned. Whether or not you make money, that's going to be up to you guys. But to the extent that you believe that you'll do better if we save all the nuclear plants in the world and get more built, then man, that's a dream team right there. Couldn't be happier to work with you guys.
It's a good cost benefit analysis right there. I like that. You're mentioning a lot of things that I want to sort of touch upon, and I think that I have a somewhat of a grip on where you stand and all this after I've been preparing for this interview, obviously. But I'd still like to sort of ask you to give me your 30,000-foot view on the energy sector. If you want to focus in on Europe or nuclear specifically, that'd be fine, because there's a lot to talk about there. But what are you seeing? What are you not seeing? What do you want to see? What's going on? What do you want to see going on? And just tell me all of it.
How should I summarize this? For several hundred years, we've successfully produced the machines that build machines, and we've gotten the energy supplies that unlock new energy supplies. We are in danger of interrupting this cycle, where we may not have enough energy to find more energy. We may not have the machines we need to build more machines. That's a poetic way to put that we are in danger of interrupting really good things for various reasons. and we do not know for sure how or when we're going to recover. That's what I see right now. So it takes planning, it takes people, it takes time to deliver energy systems that then are so good we can ignore them, that are practically that run themselves almost, it seems, for people. So here's what I mean. The electricity grid, by expanding and adding customers and adding volume of power delivered, and by in many ways increasing centralization and coordination across vast regions, electricity got cheaper for a really long time. And we built a world off of relatively cheap electricity. Electricity has severe supply demand constraints. It is one of the least storable things in the world. Changing demand and changing supply at the same time is very difficult to plan for. And costs have started rising substantially for electricity above inflation over the last 20 years. And I think it has been completely underappreciated by experts, by economists, by political leaders, until the point at which it starts breaking. That point is now. The war was, if anything, a symptom rather than a cause. The systems I'm talking about were starting to strain and crack. That is electricity administration, electricity trading, electricity generating. All of these things were under severe strain at the point that the war in Ukraine was launched. And now we're getting to critical days that could define the next few decades. That it will define the world that us young people grow up in. And I'm not even talking about the climate change. That's, if anything, almost a distraction when looking at the need to supply energy today, tomorrow, in December, this year, 2022. The decisions that countries that claim to care about climate change are making today in order to survive the winter have nothing to do with climate change. In fact, many of the terrible decisions that got us into this mess had nothing to do with climate change. So I think we're in an era of fragility and of immediacy, and reputations are going to get made in the critical days over the next year. Reputations are going to get destroyed. People's lives are going to be set on their path towards a new direction, both good and bad, over the next year. And Europe is the fulcrum here, in my opinion, in the world.
I think it's kind of obvious to us living over here when you see I don't own a house. I moved back with my parents a couple of years ago. It was a great decision. But my wife's dad owns a house, and his energy bill has gotten higher than his mortgage, and it's stayed there for a while now. They're not rich. They're middle-class family, so they have a normal home. But it's a normal home. It's a home, right? It's not meant to be less expensive. I mean, energy is not meant to be more expensive than a home, I think. So, and I understand that. Okay.
Let's expand on that.
Sure.
We have lived in a historical aberration where energy was cheap, and it was so cheap that we almost forgot about it. You know, people are expensive. Getting their time and their attention, their help around the house, that's expensive. Electricity's cheap. If you, Antonio, have you traveled in very poor areas of the world?
Yeah.
What do you notice? Energy is extremely expensive. But compared to energy, people are very cheap.
Right. Right.
This is a dangerous trend to go backwards on. People getting cheap as energy gets expensive. Look, in many ways, human rights, social advancement, such as it is, these are gifts, in my opinion, of people being costly and energy being cheap.
Right, but that's not going to last.
We're going to see people
being cheap. That's not going to last, right? Because if your labor is cheap, you're not getting paid enough money to pay for the energy that you use. You're going to take to the streets. That's what we are seeing across the globe, right? That's what's happening.
It may be that taking to the streets cannot solve people being worth less and energy costing more. You can throw out every single person in every single political party, and that's not the same issue as stable investment in energy sources that are on demand and over time pay for themselves many times over, and such are the bedrock of a cheap energy world. Like, this isn't an attack on democratic action. It's not an attack on demonstration. It's just saying that if the investments aren't made, if maintenance isn't done for the critical energy systems, then no amount of throwing people out of office will change the fact that humans are going to be worth less and less, and their lives are going to be shrinking in what they can consume. And I know there's a lot of people that think that that's a good thing, especially in Europe. A lot of people think it's better to go without. I mean, look, I'm an American. I'm in America, and after moving out of San Francisco, where I lived on very little and everything was extremely expensive, it was almost a preview in some way of the Europe that's coming. I've moved to Chicago, where there's an immense amount of fresh water, an immense amount of cheap, already decarbonized energy from a ring of grand nuclear plants that are just surround the edges of the city. And we're at a great trading hub for the railroads, for the roads, for even natural gas pipelines. And this is a city of plenty. And I realized when I got here, this is what I want to have for everybody in the whole world. Enough water, enough space, enough air, enough of electricity. And I've secured it for myself. Good, great for me, right? But these are the systems that are going to be strained to the breaking point in many parts of not just the developing world. No. In the developed world, where for generations, progress was in a certain direction of things getting better, of things getting easier. I think we're at the cusp of having to face that not being true anymore, and having to have heroes and heroic action and a newly informed and motivated public rise up to demand the things that used to be taken for granted.
Why doesn't what you just say, why doesn't that sound like a lot to ask? Having clean water, clean air, having all these things, having energy available. It doesn't sound like a lot to ask. Yet, if you look at what's happening in real life, for most of us, it looks like it's going to start becoming even too much to ask. What's broken?
This is a trickier problem and probably goes beyond this first discussion, to be sure. But I'm tempted to go over and get. In fact, I'm going to go grab some books that are on my bookshelf just a few steps away.
Sure.
All right, I'm back. So these books are not an answer in and of itself, but they've been fascinating me lately as I've been reading them. It's just a few books I got at an online auction. So what do we have here? We have maxims and instructions for the boiler room. Here's one, Handbook of Calculations for Engineers, and the new catechism of the steam engine. When I've been looking through these books, which, include how to get hired on as a young man, of course, shoveling coal and managing, say, a steam boiler for a big apartment complex, how to get hired on and not die. What an interesting book. How to get hired on to provide energy in the most advanced way ever conceived by human society up to that point. So these are about 120 years old. And then how to do it well enough that you don't blow up your boiler, damage the system, kill yourself, suffocate yourself, burn yourself. And it's interesting to read that, like, there used to be a much tighter physical connection between people and their energy supply. I was going to say food supply, but I'm here in Chicago, where there have been millions of people living on this spot not growing their own food for a really long time. So I'm not going to try to get and make this about getting out to the farm and understanding cattle more. I'm just going to talk about the energy part, where running water, electricity, even heat in your apartment. All of those things are not new. They were developed 100, 120, 140 years ago in some cases. I'm in an apartment building that's 120 years old. Last year, turned 120 years old, about the same age as these books, about the same age as, let's do this one. So this, modern power generators. So this is a book that's also about 115 years old, and it's got some incredible diagrams in it of, let me see if I can find one for you. This is meant to be a popular book, for a rising, wealthy, upper middle class, to be sure, because not everyone's going to be able to afford a book of this size. But here we have, here we have a power plant, yeah? And in this power plant, you can lift off this, let me see. Sorry, a little bit awkward. You can lift this off and you can see inside the basic design of a power plant. There's a ton of details here. Try to put this up for everybody.
That's one cool book, man.
Yeah, thank you. It's an incredible detail. You can keep lifting it off, and there's layer after layer here, and a diagram showing what are all the parts, and really, really well-written text introducing the reader to all this stuff. So who is the reader? What are they talking about? If you can allow me just a few more moments on this weird diversion, I wanted to read you a few quotes from the introduction of this book. Let's see. The discussion of matters mechanical is no longer restricted to the professional institutes and the technical press. The reports in our daily papers of the meetings of the common councils might often be mistaken for discussions at meetings of engineering societies. Not exactly sure what the common councils are that's being referred to by this British author, but what he's saying is discussions of non-technical societies could be mistaken for discussion of learned engineering societies. So obsessed were people, again, perhaps the middle class or upper middle class and upper class in Britain of 1906, when this was published, of matters mechanical. And if you read longer, he's saying everyone's talking about how big and powerful engines are getting. That's what he's talking about. Power plants, steam buggies, railroads. Here we go, just a moment. A daily paper is now behind the times if it does not devote pages or publish supplements chronicling the progress of engineering. And with the gradual disappearance of the horse from our streets and country lanes, the technical terms of mechanics are becoming part of the common language, even of the drawing room. So we don't even have drawing rooms anymore in many ways. But what's interesting to me, finally getting back to some of the question you actually asked me before I started grabbing books off my shelf. These texts were about new and amazing developments. Almost nothing changes anymore. Compared to adding indoor water, electricity, and machine power, what can we possibly say has happened in 20, 30, 40 years? Oh, cell phones. Yeah, well, we do. I mean, look, have cell phones really changed things? You could still get a hold of people before. People could get a hold of each other across the world before if they really wanted to. If they really needed to, they could find ways. It was expensive, but you could do it. News could be passed around the world very quickly. Twitter has made that even faster, but how can we compare that to running water, sewers? Even in modern medicine, it feels like the advancements have slowed and there's only so much more we can do to extend our lives through modern medicine. Yeah. Even nutrition science. There's not a lot to know about nutrition compared to just eating the things that our ancestors ate as a first proxy, but making sure they aren't spoiled. Right. So I would say that with the slowdown of advancement, we've seen a lack of attention and enthusiasm for young people around the world to go into the systems that keep up our everyday life. Those systems, electricity and water and heating, have become so efficient in many ways that they require almost no people. And then people of talent and interest and ability have stayed away from the mechanical arts, as you might say. Give you one example here. It was common knowledge back when I was in engineering school, this was 10, 15 years ago, that a lot of people were not going into engineering from engineering programs. One of the stats that I heard is that 75% of Columbia University's engineering program, this was something I heard from somebody I trust, and I think it was 2010, were going into finance. While the energy usage per capita was not actually going up much in New York or in the country. Now, around the world, yes, and there's some role of some big role of New York in international finance. But think of this: more and more people not being needed or not going in to study or work on or develop the systems that keep us all alive and healthy. At some point, something was going to have to shock us and force us to pay attention to the physical infrastructure again. It may just be that this energy crisis is the thing that does it, but there's no guarantee that we come out of it okay.
Right.
So all of that summarized, shall we say, our attention has been on other matters. During that time, systems that we rely on have gotten rickety and have gotten delicate, and they've been abused in the darkness.
Right. And I guess the same argument can be made for the mining world and mining engineering and stuff like that. It's not a sexy profession, but we're gonna have to get those minerals and metals from somewhere to build our energy future as well. And you're right. I agree on what you said was basically it's. And I don't even know if it's mathematically possible to do the same as what we did in the period that you were referencing, meaning we went from, as cliche as it may sound, from 0 to 1, which is from nothing to something, which is infinite growth. Now you can go from 1 to 100 or 1,000, and sure, that's a lot of growth, but it's not the same as infinite growth.
And it's not the same as what's required to maintain. That is, building systems the first time and expanding them is not the same thing as maintenance. And maintenance isn't the same thing as having to fully replace and upgrade and transform. So we're saying we need to make this energy transformation when it's not even clear whether we're qualified caretakers of the system we have. Now, there's a lot of people who have mistaken an inability to plan ahead and develop the resources we need with climate progress. That is, Britain's the worst case here, where people have looked at the shutdown of coal, the lack of replacing coal with something that suitably does the same job as what coal did, and then claiming that that's climate progress because the carbon number went down. That is extremely fragile climate progress. There's more than one way to make the carbon go down. One is just pure degrowth. Yeah, just deepest damage to society that will cause the carbon numbers to go down. Heck, if we cut down every tree in Britain over the next 3 winters and burn them all, it's only going to be a partial increase in carbon numbers. That's part of the issue of the carbon balance in the world. The amount of energy that we're getting from past plants, past algae, past dinosaurs, shall we say, is immense compared to the amount of biomass that's growing each year. If we only had the biosphere to rely on, you could say we would be forced to live within our means very rapidly, and we would destroy almost every single tree in the world to get there. So that's what inspires the degrowthers to say we need to consume less. But that's what inspires us young people about nuclear, where we can have our cake and eat it too, truly, if we prepare in time for this difficult, tricky, and brilliant technology, nuclear energy.
Right. And I feel like I am getting a better understanding of your 30,000 foot view. What I don't understand, though, is that, like, I like to believe that on the side of every deal, in every deal, there's 2 sides. There's winners and losers. So this may sound like a vague question, but who's winning from all this? Like this energy policy that we've had in Europe over the last, since Fukushima, really, I guess, because it clearly isn't me. It clearly aren't others in the middle class. So who's on the winning side of this trade?
So we have to define winning into like, people who are winning over the last 10 years, but whose victories are being destroyed by every day that passes with record high fossil fuel prices. We could describe people who have been losing for 10 years patiently and now are about to win. But I like what you're asking. You're basically saying who benefits, right? Qui bono. Yeah. Like what's the catch? Who's doing really well here? Because is it the natural gas traders? No, they're getting rocked by every whim of that's coming out of the Kremlin. Every little on off, any one of those little manipulations, shall we say, either intentional, unintentional, who can even say at this point? Those are making and breaking people faster than I think we can say that the field of energy trading as a whole is benefiting. Like it's too unstable, too ferocious. As you said yourself, nuclear energy is really important now, but have you been doing really well in mining stocks, for example? So we need the things coming out of mines, but the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. So who has benefited? People love to put a narrative into this and say, oh, well, there's the World Economic Forum, or there's, Putin himself has benefited, or the green ideology. Anyone who's deeply embedded in green ideology must be loving the current moment because it's so destructive. But I think it's just, on average, people, there isn't benefit to go around. And I don't think that pointing out a few individuals who've gotten lucky with very specific investments is going to help here. I hear from very smart and informed people in the nuclear community about what this or that oil and gas company is doing to try to sabotage nuclear. But in the end, almost everybody in an advanced country loses when electricity becomes more expensive. Almost nobody gains. There's only relative changes. And I just don't think that the number of people gaining, or the type of people who could be gaining for this chaos, is big enough to find a narrative in it. I think it's just chaos and destruction with essentially no gain.
Right. And
it's just chaos.
I didn't really mean it as a conspiracy or something like that. I was mostly focusing on the groups of people, like, put me in the middle class. I come from the lower class. My family's been able to climb up to the middle class, basically, which is being great for us, obviously. But the class that we're in right now, the middle class, is definitely not benefiting. I did a very quick calculation on what Belgians on average earn. Most of them are going to start not being able to tie both ends at the end of the month really soon if the prices keep growing as they have been, especially energy.
You guys are scheduled to turn off 50% of your electricity, the cheap half, within a few months.
Right. What's that all about? I thought that was all done, by the way. I thought that was, they voted on not closing nuclear down by 2025. What happened?
You've sold your nuclear fleet to a French gas company. Like, it's not really up to you guys in the end, is it? You'd have to nationalize or something to force them, and they don't like how they've been treated. So they're like, maybe we don't even want to cooperate on nuclear anymore. You guys are over a barrel. You are in a very dangerous and bad position. And your energy minister is going to look for any excuse to blame somebody else for shutdowns that she wants. Yeah. She wants the shutdowns, was very embarrassed and just humiliated when she was forced to admit that maybe we need to keep the nuclear plants. And then the nuclear company, again, a French gas company, I'm sure they have Belgian interests at the top of their head. It's not even clear that the energy sector in France has French interests in their head, and they're practically nationalized. So what chance do Belgians stand in this? This is not a good situation, Antonio. This is not a bunch of very basic lessons that shouldn't have to be learned, may be learned about not selling off critical infrastructure to entities that don't answer to you. But you're gonna demonstrate a lot of powerful lessons for the rest of the world. I just wish it wasn't the case, and I'm going to be fighting as hard as possible to make sure it doesn't happen. But it's not looking good. I will be coming to Belgium almost certainly again and again as nuclear plants are scheduled to be shut off. But I think Belgians are going to have to get really angry really angry. If we're looking for scapegoats, anyone saying in the past 10 years that you should shut down a nuclear plant, they got to be out of public life. They got to be eliminated from public influence, like entirely. Those are you got to get angry because it's going to get much worse than it's been. The only if energy prices go down, it's probably not because suddenly there's a lot more energy production that's going to help out Belgians. It's probably because Belgian industries and jobs and lives are being destroyed.
Right.
People literally can't afford to have heat anymore. And so there's a little bit left for anyone who can't afford.
Right.
The world is not fair. Energy has made it more fair. Without energy, things get really, really unequal really rapidly.
And it's like, you're talking about public influence. It's funny that you mentioned that. There's a political party over here. They're called Green. That's the name, Groen. And so they release these advertisements, anti-nuclear advertisements, basically, where they give a lot of explanation as to why nuclear should not exist. And that's public influence right there. It's YouTube ads. It's like literally the chance that if a Belgian watches this and it's about nuclear, and they're targeting these videos that are about nuclear to play anti-nuclear ads before them. I've had it happen before that. And I always go to the comments and say something snarky or try and explain how nuclear waste is not really a problem. But I don't think that's helping. So
I want to push back on that. Yes, it does help. It does help. Comments, especially careful and constructive comments, are being seen. People go to the comments. People aren't judging based on the video or whatever. They're going to the comments to see very rapidly what other humans are saying about this issue, what other Belgians are saying, what people writing in my language are saying about this issue. Those comments do matter. Twitter has become an unsafe space for anti-nuclear campaigners. It is not safe for people who are against nuclear. The network effects of Twitter, and I mean, in many ways, the dominance of the English language across the platform has meant that, for better or worse, and in my opinion, for better, one big view is going to take over on the really divided subjects. And on Twitter, nuclear has won. But it's a fight we need to keep having. Why does this matter? Because journalists are on Twitter, young journalists who do the bulk of the labor of reporting at big newspapers. They're on Twitter and they see sentiment. They see that the public likes nuclear. That's good because most young people, say in journalism, I've found they do like nuclear, but they may not know that the public likes it. And they may only hear from their editor who may be skeptical or not liking it. With every day that passes, the accumulated weight of comments on YouTube videos from folks like yourself, Antonio, it matters. It has mattered. Public sentiment has shifted. Now, without dropping away from our duty to comment and inform online, we have to transmit that information to the elites who aren't paying attention, that need cover to act on their pro-nuclear sentiment or need some fear in order to not act on their anti-nuclear sentiment. That's what we need. And it does start from a bedrock of even things like internet comments. So I want to thank you for your service.
Yeah, I'll accept that. Thanks, I guess, for a moment here. You see that on Twitter a lot. People do defend nuclear with great reasoning too. I recently spoke to one Brian Gitt, who used to work in solar and other renewable energies, and he moved to nuclear, and he's been doing a great job on Twitter, and he's been very polite in arguing with people, unlike the majority of people on Twitter. But he just, he would just share an article or something that he wrote that's simply the facts, and these things get retweeted. The power of Twitter. That's why Twitter is so powerful. So I guess it's a good thing, as you mentioned. I'm wondering though, how do I spin all of this information and use it as an investor? And part of being an investor is, the biggest part of being an investor is making a bet on how the future might look like. And I'm trying to look into history to figure out, what is a probability of something that happened before happening right now? What is it going to be? And all that type of thing. So I guess it might be helpful to ask you, what period in history does the current energy situation in the world resembles the most, in your opinion, or is this completely different? And do you have any guidelines there?
On energy, I think it is completely different. An immense amount of investment was made pushing the energy system into a configuration that isn't good enough. I think that's new. I think that the pressures that have changed that investment have come from the outside, shall I say, in ways that did not come in previous eras. Let me say what I mean by outside. Customers need energy. They go and they find ways to pay for what's on offer. That money goes back into rebuilding bigger and better versions of that offered to customers in the past. We have broken this tradition that I would say, in my opinion, has come from, the 1860s, 70s, 80s, from the gaslight era in some countries. That's where you take coal, heat it up under a vacuum, the gases come off, you pipe it into the street lights, and then burn it there. From that as being one of the first great public provisions of energy, shall we say, into electricity, and then electricity has been the dominant public energy source along with natural gas in cities. So that's the system we had. Then there were pressures that were coming from outside of, you might say, engineering supply and demand, where we said some types of energy were bad, some were good, for reasons other than their performance in the engineered system. I didn't say financial performance, because look, the coal plants that are being fired up by Germany have had bad financial performance, but suddenly they're life or death. So you have to have them. They just didn't have good financial performance, but they have the correct operating characteristics, according to Germany, to keep Germans alive this winter. So the pressures to take a system that is now required in an emergency, and therefore was probably still important, but was not getting paid financially, or was even getting specially taxed. That's an example of outside pressure against engineering judgment, against merely efficiently supplying energy products to an end consumer. Political pressure has changed what energy products are allowed or not. Now, I got into nuclear energy to fight carbon emissions, or that was the long view I had. I wanted to do something that ultimately reduced carbon emissions. We've messed up energy so badly that worrying about carbon emissions has become a luxury belief in some ways. That's not at all to say that the things that scientists state are happening because of carbon emissions aren't happening, just that in the end, we will always do what it takes to supply our immediate needs. And if we care about something more than immediate needs, we've got to plan in the long term. And the planning that was done was bad and insufficient. So this time is not like other times. We're rediscovering energy in the worst way by realizing we don't have enough of it. And I don't know, I cannot say what's coming out. I don't know. In my opinion, it's so uncertain and so insane for me as just a little bitty investor. For the bit that I'm not reinvesting into myself and my staff and my company, I'm just putting it in ETFs and looking away. I just have to look away. I cannot possibly be productive in trying to save nuclear and expanding it if I'm even worrying about the chaos up and down. I've made a conscious decision to not chase big, just to stay away. But I'm not telling you guys to do that. I'm not telling you and your investors, your audience community, to do that or not. I'm just saying for myself, it's so chaotic that I cannot. Future is clouded for me. Some places aren't going to make it. That's going to be loss of demand. Some places are going to make it, but it's not clear whether their demand is going to be channeled in a way that does well for you and your investment. You can be totally right in all sorts of ways while losing your shirt in this kind of chaos.
Absolutely. That's something to think about. I guess when you say ETFs, is it fair of me to ask something about the URNM ETF or the URA ETF or some other?
This is going to sound wild, but I stay extremely far away from not just uranium, but energy in general. Why? Again, I'm putting almost no thought into my own investments. I'm staying away from it. Yeah. It would occupy too much of my time and attention otherwise, potentially. for me, the closer I get to nuclear, the less I want a conflict in my head about like who's going to do better if I promote this or that, or who's going to benefit or hurt if I have to say something against the nuclear industry or speak out against some practice we see in uranium. Or I just don't even want that conflict. You guys can worry about that conflict if you become advocates. For myself, I sleep easy.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You have no, I absolutely understand. I have something like that in my business that I do here online. I have companies that I work with, but I wouldn't own their stock. I wouldn't get paid in stock and all these things that I because I intend on, I call my show when I'm talking to CEOs the CEO barbecue, and so I intend to grill them and ask them uneasy questions and ask them about stuff that they've done in the past and have not worked, but they're trying to replicate and stuff like that. Will I be able to do that if I have a lot of my money in the company, or if I'm being based on performance? Possibly not. Probably will, but possibly not. And so I absolutely understand where you're coming from.
In the end, I have a lot of soul in the game and the outcome of nuclear in general, and some skin in the game. I guess I've built an audience around it, and I have professional training in it, and would like to stay in it for a career. But in terms of especially small investments in specific companies, I just have to stay away and stay neutral, at least for now. How about this? If through my work, you and your investment community do really well, you are free to get me a beer or coffee when I travel to your part of the world, which may be sooner rather than later, since Belgium is going to really be a sick man of Europe in energy.
Okay. Absolutely. Well, just I know that you were sort of, I'm looking at my clock and we're probably going over time here. I was just thinking it's just a concept that I've been thinking about, that a lot of people would, when you see them talking on Twitter, they would be like, I'm defending nuclear, but in the end, we're going to need a mix of everything. So let's be kind to solar and wind. I'm failing to see that. I'm failing to see why we need solar and wind if they're as inefficient as they are today. If we would invest our time, money, and energy completely into nuclear, would we need any other energy source?
I'm a nuclear specialist. I'm a little bit of a nuclear supremacist. I see it as both the highest potential energy and the one that needs the most love, care, and attention. So for me, I think that the nuclear part of the puzzle is one where if we don't get it right, we're not going to get a lot of things right. In terms of how much wind and solar we need, there may be a transition period where just we have extremely inefficient fossil systems that are backing up new wind and solar, and in which case we're going to need energy. And if we can build it through that way, in a way that doesn't interrupt the planning process to make nuclear in the future, maybe that's okay. Obviously, you take a little bit, you have some social and environmental impacts of all energy sources. Renewables are no exception here. In fact, they're one of the most interesting cases of shifting impacts from one part of the energy life cycle, the emissions, to other parts. Look, there are plenty of people working on wind and solar. There are plenty of laws in their favor. There's lots of capital in its favor. It doesn't need my help. It's gonna do okay or not on its own merits. Where I'm gonna put my time is on nuclear, and if we have more of it, everything else gets easier in decision making in energy. And if that means more or less wind and solar when that time comes, we'll see. But for myself, the supply and demand issue in electricity on a first order problem means that we need to go for things that are almost exactly like nuclear. And if that makes a worse investment environment for wind and solar, then that's the order of operations. Nuclear first. And if that is bad for wind and solar, then wind and solar can adjust, or we can adjust to see if we can save some of it. But look, now there's a lot of hubris in even talking like that, because at the moment, nuclear is very hard to build and slow. And it's wind and solar that seems to be going very rapidly. So I'm definitely describing a future world. And I'm obviously going to be prepared to eat a lot of crow if we just never regain our capabilities to build nuclear effectively in the West, because maybe we won't, right? I'm going to try to fight to make sure we do, but there's no guarantee. we may just be a civilization in decline. Hence the first 30-minute navel gazing that we had on this call. But I have more hope than that. I'm more optimistic than that. I read these engineering books and I see the incredible things that were worked out of necessity because things were much worse. And through a certain amount of engineering, we made them much better. That shows that we can achieve. And we can never forget that it was possible. Our books are too good. Our access to information is too good. We've got videos showing us the good life. We won't forget that it was possible. We're not going to lose the tablets in the library. The archives aren't going to get smashed up, and then we won't have this society recede into legend. No, I think we're going to fight a lot more than that. I think we're going to do better than that. I think we're going to be able to come back and build nuclear in a way that justifies these bold words that I've spoken in a time when it's wind and solar that seems to be cheap and nuclear that seems to be expensive.
Right. Well, that's a great note to end the conversation on. I guess just, is there something that I failed to bring up, but you wanted to talk about when you came on?
No. And I just want to end on saying Belgium is about to do terrible and insane things to its energy supply. But unlike Germany, it's a lot smaller. See? So the world will be able to ignore horrible things happening to you slightly better than it would be able to ignore the same with Germany. This should be a challenge. This is very dangerous for you in Belgium. And I think that now would be the time to be talking to other young Belgians who would like to stage some kind of intervention for the elders to help them understand just how desperate and terrible it's going to be if there isn't major progress. You guys don't control the ministries. You guys don't control the French gas company that owns your nuclear plants. This should be very dangerous and inspiring to you right now. And I'd love to keep chatting with you about what you're going to do about it, because there's potential.
Let's do something about it. Absolutely. I don't think the Belgian government is really used to like large gatherings and protests and stuff like that, but they do listen at times. They're not perfect at it, but they do listen at times. So I do, knowing the culture and sort of from the inside, I guess you could say, I do see potential in doing something about it. So let's keep chatting and figure it out.
All right. So not just waffling, you might say, the actual action. Okay. Well, let's be in touch about that, because there's a lot of potential in Belgium to stop the bleeding of the loss of your energy infrastructure.
Absolutely. Mark Nelson, thank you for investing your time in me, sir.
Thanks, Antonio.